Preparing, got it. Okay, guys, welcome everyone to the Irish American Heritage Museum. We're delighted to have Professor James Kennelly, or Kennelly, with us from Skidmore College. He's a fellow Kerryman, and he's going to talk to us tonight about the life and times of Sir Horace Plunkett, who was an incredibly important figure in Irish economic and agricultural life, kind of transformed, I suppose, rural Ireland in lots of ways with his cooperative movement. We'll probably have Professor Kennelly back next year too, because one of the largest food companies in the world is having a big anniversary next year, Kerry Group, and of course, being a Kerry woman, we're very interested in that. So stay tuned. But I'm delighted to have Dr. Jim Kennelly, who's Professor of International Business, as I say, and I'm just going to hand him over, and we'll get started on this presentation. Thanks for bearing with us. Take care. Okay.
Alrighty.
Clip that on.
Hey, good evening, everyone. May have to shift this a little bit to get myself in here. Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's a great pleasure to talk to you all about Horace Plunkett. You might wonder, why Horace Plunkett? This story goes back at least 22 years or so ago when I was writing a history of the Kerry Group. And I was caterwauling around Kerry, beginning to talk with farmers about the beginnings of what's now this multinational corporation called the Kerry Group, based in Tralee in North Kerry. And as I spoke with these farmers, we went back to the beginnings of the Kerry co-op. And of course, this name Plunkett kept coming up all the time. Now, I know a little Irish history, right? So I thought of, well, Blessed Oliver Plunkett, right? Blessed Oliver Plunkett. I have six aunts who were nuns. So we were in a lot of convents in our time, and Blessed Oliver Plunkett would be up there quite often. But it wasn't this Plunkett. I thought of the 1916 and Joseph Plunkett, one of the martyrs of 1916, and Count Plunkett, his father, and his engagement with the Irish struggle for freedom. He was a count, all right, but he was a papal count, of course. But he wasn't that Plunkett. This Plunkett is a very different character. Same family, all related, going back more than 800 years in Ireland. He's a very different fellow and a most interesting life. Not the type of person I'd be looking at to study. What do I know about Anglo-Irish landowners, right? But he has an incredibly interesting story. It was very impactful during his time, and I think largely forgotten, maybe not completely forgotten, but certainly underappreciated in the Ireland of 2021. So I'll take some time this evening to talk a bit about Horace Plunkett, and off we go. First of all, I'd say that, when you look at the pantheon of Irish heroes, you're looking at the Wolfe Tones and the Robert Emmets and the James Connellys and the Patrick Pearces and many, many others. You're not going to see a guy like Horace Plunkett up on the wall. Wrong religion, wrong provenance, wrong class. But this notion of normal courage, that's something that Plunkett practiced every day. He was courageous in his thought. He was courageous in the problems that he tackled. And there's a lot to be said for Horace Plunkett. I was born in England. That was my first mistake. And he was an Englishman in his mannerisms, in his accent, in where he was educated. But he's a guy full of contradictions. He was a card-carrying capitalist, to be sure. He was an entrepreneur in his time. Yet he was a zealous proponent of cooperative organization in Ireland. And he was not the absolute first to bring it to that nation, to that island, but he was the one who brought it to be a movement, right? To be a revolutionary movement. And he was, in fact, a revolutionary. He was a peaceful revolutionary, but no less a revolutionary than so many other Irish patriots. Go back to where I was there. This thing has a mind of its own, it seems. I just want to go back one.
You're controlling the one behind you.
Oh, it's the one in front of the, yeah, okay, we're gonna have to get used to that. Okay, but he was a lot of different things. He was a capitalist who was a proponent of cooperative organization. He was a legitimate cowboy. He spent 10 years in the American West, not that far away from where Theodore Roosevelt was doing the same thing, actually. And he was over there for the same reasons as Roosevelt, right? They were sort of sickly children. They had to be built up. And there was Plunkett as a cowboy out in the Powder River of Wyoming. He was born into an Irish landowning family, yet he was overwhelmed with this zeal to reform Irish rural life, which was anything other than life in the big house. He was a Protestant, all right, but he could care a fig about religion. His view of Protestantism was pretty darn dark and dismal. So when he went after the Catholic Church, he went after the Protestant religions the same way. If anything, he was agnostic. He called himself an Anglo-American Irishman because he was deeply connected to all three countries. He was English by birth and manners. He was Irish in terms of his heart, and he was American in terms of his experience and the times he lived in the States. And throughout his entire life, he wove together the strands of his connections with these three different nations. He was a liberal unionist, but he was drummed out of the corps. He was marched out of the party. He was a traitor to his class. Despite his conversion to home rule of a sort after some long while, never trusted by nationalists, never accepted by the Irish Parliamentary Party, always suspect because you wouldn't know what he would do. He famously compared himself to being like a dog on a tennis court. He was of equal annoyance perpetually to both sides. And that was Plunkett. So a really interesting guy, I think, to study. And I find him to be fascinating. Now, Plunkett family itself, I'm no student of Anglo-Irish history in particular, but we know where they're from. They've been on the island for 800 some years, and their home base is Dungiven Castle in County Meath. Still there, still occupied by the Dungiven family, and still a remarkable place about which we'll have a lot more to say. But although he was born in England, he was raised in Ireland at Dungiven Castle. And like I say, the Plunketts go way back in Irish life. I won't spend time with that. His early life was very typical of his time and of his class. He was raised, in a way typical of the Anglo-Irish ascendancy. He grew up at hunts. The hunts were a very big thing in County Meath. He was very much a person of his class. He was educated at Eton and Oxford, right? He did the Dungiven Castle thing, but he was never much of a socializer. He wasn't a great mixer. The Dungiven Castle scene did not really move him very much. So 1879, he took off like so many, like he was the third son. So he wasn't coming into the title. He wasn't coming into the castle. He wasn't supposed to come into any particular fortune. So like so many other English and Anglo-Irish of the time, he headed west to New York, Chicago, and out to Wyoming. There was the big cattle boom at the time. People were making money hand over fist. The range was wide open. Business opportunities galore. It was indeed the Wild West. And that's where he went. And he was engaged with the Powder River Company. It was a big old ranch in the Powder River, some hours north of Cheyenne in Wyoming. And he was engaged in a lot of other activities too. So first of all, being a cowboy, learning ranching, it was, as he says, it was very refreshing for him because he was no longer judged as some type of aristocrat, as some type of honorable whatever. He had to prove his worth and his mettle with other men. And he had to do what they did. He had to ride, he had to rope, he had to deal, he had to avoid being cheated, all these things. And a man would have to stand, I'm saying men, but I mean, he'd have to stand up on his own feet. That was refreshing for him. It was a different world than that stuffy patrician world of Dungiven Castle and Dublin Castle and all that. So it opened him up in a very big way. He was involved in all sorts of entrepreneurial schemes. He was investing in water schemes. He was investing in these slaughterhouses. They were investing, the railroads were coming through, so they were investing that way. He was partnering with this group and that group. They were getting money in from London and from Dublin, investing on behalf of their friends, forming these joint stock companies. So it was a very busy time. And he was exuberantly involved with this activity. He also developed some real appreciation for the American West, for the size and scale and scope of America itself, and the energy of America. You know, the hunger, you know, the motivation that a lot of people had. So it was a very it's a big change for him, and sort of opened up his mind in a lot of different ways. And he also saw the challenge of America, the fact that, you know, back in the old world, the Irish are worried about the Dutch and the Danes and all that sort of thing, you know, worried about selling butter in the market in England. He looked at America and what they were doing here, and the size of the beef trade, and the scale of some of the farming, and the people coming in from everywhere and growing this country. He said, you know, there's something here which is it's gonna move things in a very big way. So he could see what was happening in terms of competition coming from America and being felt certainly in the old world. So it opened him up in a lot of different ways. You know, you can read his diaries at the time. He kept the diary for more than 50, for about 50 years or so. And he began the diary, or at least the first copies that we have, while he was in the West. And you can feel the hardships. He describes them in minute detail, and the opportunities, and the schemes, and the bickering, and just the stories he tells about what daily life was like. So Plunkett came, he had some type of epiphany. We don't know exactly what it was. It wasn't like some big cooperative moment, but it changed him in fundamental ways. And that's just a blurry picture of the Powder River Ranch itself. Okay. He came back to Ireland in 1889. His father was quite ill. His first older brother had passed away. His second older brother was now Lord Dunsany. He wasn't doing so well, had a number of issues and problems. His sister had lost her husband. Plunkett found himself in charge of the family, basically, as like a guardian for the family. So he came back for a number of different reasons. So he comes back to Ireland in 1889, and there's a lot of things going on. I mean, the land wars are maybe not quite over, but they're on their way to being sort of solved. Parnell is still at the zenith, at the top of his game. The scandal is going to hit, I guess, a year later or so. So the land question is kind of on its way to being solved. There's some momentum, right? There have been a number of land acts, and there will be more to come over the next decade plus. The state of agriculture, not so good. So even if Irish farmers began to come into their land, the land they were coming into, they were not going to work that land very well. It was a backward, as Joe Lee used to say, it was a retarded state. The Irish question continued to dominate everything. Constitutional politics was all. You were either a nationalist in the Irish Parliamentary Party with Parnell, or you were a unionist, and that's what everything seemed to circle around. Plunkett came back from a very practical experience out west, and he wanted to change the game. He said, you know, we can do better than this. Does it remind you of any other times politically when you've got two parties who don't talk to each other, won't work together, but you know there are things you can do together to actually build a nation? Well, he saw that, and he determined to do something about it. So at the time, the Irish economy was agricultural, right? There was no industry on the island, save the northeast corner of the island up in Ulster. The farmers had come into their own land, but then what? What are they going to do with it? No one was talking about that. No one was talking about improved farming methods. No one was talking about technology. And yeah, talk about, Joyce liked to joke about the Dutch and the Danes and all that, but it was no unhealthy obsession. The Dutch and the Danes were eating Ireland's lunch in terms of their production of cheese and their organizational methods. They'd found an organizational solution that for them, especially the Danes, cooperation had worked. And it also fit in with their national aspirations, with who they were as Danes, right? The economic, commercial part of the movement fit in with the folk themselves, with the culture, with the traditions, right? It was made to work. Plunkett said, why can't we do it here? So methods were backward and primitive. Farmers were price takers. They had no market power. They were not going anywhere up the value chain. They would bring their milk to a middleman and they would take what they got or take nothing at all. They sell off the fat, dump the skin, whatever. Very uneconomic and very backward even for the time. Middlemen dominated, right? Quality was very low. There was no sense of quality, really. The idea was they used to try to beat the dirty man. The dirty man was the inspector of all this stuff. And you just try to game the system or beat it if you could. But no notion of quality, service, standards were unknown. Many farmers were in the grip of the gombeen man. The gombeen man, the money lender, or, the term gombeen is used for a whole host of other negative sort of attributes these days, and even then. Unsavory individuals going around trying to basically slip one over on you, cheat you, take advantage of you, whatever. And there was no commercial ethos. There was no notion of really fair trading, fair business practice, the Better Business Bureau. No, it wasn't there. And Plunkett, as abstemious as he was in his business dealings, very forthright, very upright, very trustworthy, a guy who'd actually pay his debts and pay back his backers and would settle up with some level of integrity. He couldn't abide by this. But this was the Ireland that he found, or that he saw, that he perceived when he came back. So what did he come up with? Well, he'd learned a little bit about cooperation. He was probably learned some when he was back at Oxford. There was a lot of intellectual ferment at the time. I'm sure he was affected by that. He had opened up a little cooperative store in just outside Dunsany back when he'd been in Ireland. So he had a little familiarity with cooperation, but he came back and he began to develop a campaign. And it was the three betters, which he put together: better business, better farming, and better living. The idea of better business appeals to me as a professor of business, that there are some organizational solutions to things. We can find better ways to do things. And his better way was power through combination, right? By joining together, we can develop some market power. We can begin to invest in our businesses jointly together, and we can actually move down that value chain some little bit. So he thought we can do better business. And character always wove its way into all of his thinking. So there was something about a commercial character, about certain ways to do business that he believed in. Better farming. He says, we need to pay attention to science. We need to actually pay attention to science, data, technology. That sounds awfully familiar these days too. Let's look at the numbers and see what we see. But Plunkett said, let's look at what's world class. What are these other countries doing? And what should we be importing here in terms of know-how? So we can do these things better. through technology, through technical instruction, and so on. And then the third strand was better living. It was about quality of life. It was about the regeneration of rural life. And most life in Ireland at the time was rural. Even the towns, the cities, all depended on the surrounding countryside. And how do you make life worth living in those places? So it's not just about money. It's not just about the price you get when you bring your produce to market. It's about how you can live your life. Do you have these civilized amenities? Do you have libraries? Do you have theater? Do you have a literature? Do you have intellectual conversations? How rich a life can you have out there in Podunk somewhere? Maybe this is the one strand that he wished he had spent more time on when all was said and done, 50 years later. But this is also the strand that ties into the Irish revival, because this is not happening separate and apart from the revival. It's happening more or less at the same time. So around 1889 or so, well, it hasn't really blossomed yet, but it's all there. They're all reading Standish O'Grady and the old sagas and all that stuff. You've got the GAA has already been formed. You've got the Gaelic League is about to be formed. You've got Yeats and Lady Gregory beginning to sort of move towards the Irish literary theater, and then the Abbey Theater. There's a lot of ferment. There's a lot of effervescence, but they don't have an economic arm. Plunkett really supplies the economic arm to this. So he very much ties in to the Irish revival. He's tries very hard to connect. He's connected with Yeats and Lady G herself. And he sees it as not being opposed, even though, they may be nationalist. I mean, Yeats, maybe he swore to the IRB already, I don't know, but it didn't bother. He wanted to be a part of this movement too. So very perceptive, I think, on his part. So no strength without combination. The whole notion of cooperation is that we do this together. So again, it was mainly dairy that they went after first, right? Although they did organize other sectors of the economy, fishermen and some others, but they chose not to really do what they called full bore cooperation. They didn't want to go head to head with the merchants. They had a hard enough time as it was beginning to get organized in Ireland. So they didn't go into sort of the retail cooperation. That was maybe a bridge too far. That's what they had done in Britain with the Cooperative Wholesale Association, right? They had these cooperative stores. Plunkett didn't go in that direction. He says, we'll work with the producers. They'll listen to us. I mean, they're sensible people. They'll listen to us and we'll bring them along, and we'll avoid that big bloody battle with the shopkeepers, who were almost all Irish Parliamentary Party supporters. He made the movement to be non-political. He says, let's stay away from politics. Let's stay away from these constitutional questions, and let's put it aside. Let's focus on what we can do right now economically to raise up our fortunes in this country, and that is what he attempted to do. Again, we talked about creating a rural civilization, civilizing country life. He believed that if Irish people learned how to run these organizations, which were democratic organizations, right? I mean, a cooperative is it's owned by the membership. It's an organization owned by the membership. Everyone participates. It's one person, one vote. So it doesn't matter how much money you put into that, you're getting one vote, no matter how much you've invested in that cooperative, and that everyone has a chance to participate. This was going to be the first exercise in Irish democracy. He figured he was decades ahead of when any real political democracy would come to that country. And he thought that Irish co-ops could certainly do that, right? And get people ready for democracy in the political sphere. The movement was modern and cosmopolitan in its approach. So it was based on science and data. It wasn't backward looking, it was very forward looking. It was very sophisticated and cosmopolitan in terms of where it wanted to go, right? It wanted to compete globally. It wanted to compete with Holland, with Denmark, and all the rest. It was characterized by self-reliance, not self-reliance of the ourselves alone variety, but the fact that, listen, we have gifts in this country. We have distinctive competences that are ours. We need to build on what we have in this country, on the tremendous human capital, right? On our own traditions, our background, the language. Even though he spoke not a word of Irish, he appreciated the value of the language. He had some appreciation for these implicit sort of hidden advantages that could be used, could be harnessed in this country. And so that was very much, it was about self-reliance. Don't expect somebody else to come in and fix your problem. Let's get together, let's cooperate, and let's find solutions to our economic problems ourselves. It was about character, self-reliance, democracy, self-government, and education. Always education, maybe not your classical education, but certainly technical education. Learning how to do things better made a difference to him. Okay, selling cooperation. It was no walk in the park. It was no picnic. I mean, think of it. It's Ireland. It's 1889, 1890. You've got a guy like Plunkett who's now going off to the hinterlands to spout his gospel of cooperation. Now, he writes very well. He's a really fine writer if you take the trouble to read him. He's got a funny streak. He can laugh at himself. But as a speaker, he's horrible. He's terrible. He speaks with an English accent, Oxford educated. It may not go over so well up in Donegal or Connemara somewhere. Even at that, he's also a terrible speaker in that he searches for the precise word. So he'll stand here and just look for the exact correct word, and he'll leave you hanging there. And he's coming from a landlord class. He's a unionist. He's a Protestant. He's speaking to largely Catholic nationalist audiences who've been cheated by charlatans, who've been schemed at, who've learned not to trust really anybody. And he's going out there with his message. So he needed some help, to be sure. His first assistant is the third fellow from the left there. That's Robert Anderson. He was a Protestant landlord's agent in County Cork, around Mallow or somewhere. And he became the sergeant major of the cooperative movement. Hard-headed, his parents were from Ulster, a serious business guy, but again, another Protestant. Eventually, he also got George Russell, AE himself, the second from the right there. George Russell, we think of Russell as being this wonderful writer, as being the friend of writers, the mentor to writers, the artist who would paint these murals on walls of fantastic sort of apparitions and so on, with his head up in the clouds. He was also a hard-headed cooperative organizer up in County Donegal, where he organized credit unions. So he found some remarkable people, but he needed a Catholic. The Catholic was Thomas Finlay from the Society of Jesus. Father Finlay was maybe the most capable man on the island of Ireland. He was a wonderful speaker. He was a PhD in economics. He'd learned the Raiffeisen movement in Germany, so he knew all about credit unions and all that. And Plunkett had won him to the cause. And Finlay was a dramatic addition. He was somebody who was trusted by everyone of every persuasion. So he brought these people into the movement, and they began to go through the hustings there. They probably had 100 meetings or so. It took them a good year before they finally organized their first cooperative. Now, the first co-op in Ireland was actually in Drumcollar in County Limerick, but it wasn't organized by Plunkett. Everyone says it was, but no, it was the English, the CWS, who organized that cooperative. But Plunkett did get the second one, which was in Ballynahill, which was right around Foynes by Lord Monteagle's place there, Mount Trenchard. And once they got the first one in the bag, finally, they began to really move, and they began to accelerate, and they began to grow this cooperative movement. By 1894, they had to form an association, the Irish Agricultural Organization Society, to keep track of the cooperatives. So it really snowballed from that 1891 to the next decade, to the turn of the century. But it took an awful lot up front. The traveling from place to place, the skeptical audiences, sometimes the political questions would come in. So it was a very hard slog. But the way that he won them over was by his obvious sincerity. I mean, the Irish expect a big speech. They didn't get it from Plunkett, but he just made sense. And he just called out to, he just explained why it made sense. They said, what does this guy do? What's in it for him? There was nothing in particular in it for him. He wanted to save the country in his way. Noblesse oblige, whether you like that or not, that was his orientation. Now, so he's got this movement going, but at the same time, remarkably, he's got all this other stuff going on too. He did start the IAOS in 1894. This is this umbrella organization, still around as the ICOS, still 84 Merrion Square. We'll talk about that later. He broke his own rule about keeping politics out of the co-op movement. He says, things are going along so well now, I could do even more. I can do even more if I go into politics. So he ran for a seat as a liberal unionist, South Dublin, and of course he won. It was all set for him, and he went into Parliament. He was re-elected again after that, but then he was pitched out in 1900 when the unionists split the ticket. They ran somebody against him. Why? Plunkett couldn't help but vote his conscience. He would vote with the nationalists when it seemed to make sense to him. I think he voted for the Irish or the Catholic Universities Bill. He voted for something with the release of some political prisoners. He would do things like that, which didn't earn him any friends on the nationalist side, but just, the unionists said, we can't trust this guy. So he lost his seat. But he spent those years in Parliament. Needless to say, no one came to hear him speak when he spoke in Parliament. He did do one big thing, though, which was he formed the Recess Committee, the so-called Recess Committee in 1899, which led to the creation of the Irish Department of Agriculture. So you might say, what's the big deal of the creation of a government department of agriculture? Well, this was the first sort of indigenous Irish department. It was not run out of Dungiven Castle. It was run out of Parliament. Plunkett was the first vice president of this organization, and it was an Irish Department of Agriculture. It wasn't run out of England. It was only responsible to Parliament. It was by Irishmen for Irishmen. And this was a big deal because it began now to tie together this cooperative movement. He also had technical instruction. It was the Department of Agriculture and Technical Instruction, which means they were creating schools and programs around the country in advanced farming methods and all that sort of thing. It was also run pretty democratically. There was like a council of agriculture, and they had participation. They just had the local government's bill, so they had the counties had agricultural specialists or whatever, so they would come and serve in these committees. So it was a very big deal. Even after he lost his seat in Parliament, the Liberal Party asked him to stay on and serve as the vice president, which he did. Without his seat in Parliament, he maintained it for another 6 or 7 years or so, which was quite extraordinary, until the nationalists finally pitched him out of that job because they never trusted Plunkett. So run out of Parliament, run out of the department that he had created, and it was completely from him. He also served on the Congested Districts Board. He was on the first board. He didn't want to do it, but he did, and he saw an awful lot as he was traveling the western seaboard of Ireland, which made him believe ever more in the notion of self-reliance and cooperation and self-help. All this time, Plunkett didn't have his own home because, he didn't own Dungiven Castle. His brother had passed away, but the castle wasn't his. He spent a lot of time at the Kildare Street Club, if you know the Kildare Street Club on the corner of Kildare Street, right across from Trinity, owned by the National Library now, actually. And he was reputedly the second least popular member. Who was the first? I think it was Edward Martin, they say, but Plunkett was a close second, apparently. And again, just to mention here that during all this time, he was keeping these diaries, the Plunkett diaries, which I'll talk a little bit more about when we wrap up here, if I haven't run out of time, already. But another thing to mention is he would go to America every year. So he'd come over for a couple of months every winter. He was very close to Theodore Roosevelt. He was Theodore Roosevelt's primary informant on rural regeneration in the US. Roosevelt listened to him all the time, and he said, I'd make Plunkett my own Secretary of Agriculture if he was American. He didn't have American citizenship, but very close to Roosevelt. And if you look at some of the schemes that Roosevelt had in terms of rural life, you're here in Plunkett. He's taken it almost word for word from him. Okay. The diaries. So just to mention to you here very quickly, there we go. He has, it's like 1 million words, and Plunkett has a scribble that's really hard to read. I mean, you'd work real long and hard to understand a paragraph, right? But luckily, it's now been transcribed, typed, transcribed, indexed, and digitized. So it's online, courtesy of the National Library of Ireland. And it's a fascinating document to read, year by year by year by year, day by day, what Plunkett is doing. Remember, this is a guy who was involved with everything and seemed to know everyone. Whether he liked them or not is a different matter. But it's a remarkable document and a great source for research right now. He had a biography in 1949 called An Anglo-American Irishman, which was based largely on the diaries. And you can also find, bouncing around different archives, the notes from Margaret Digby, who was the historian of the cooperative movement in England, who wrote this book. You can find her own notes on Plunkett's life. Okay, so 1904, in the midst of all this, Plunkett is still in the Department of Agriculture. The cooperative movement is growing and growing. He's been pitched out of Parliament, but whatever. So what to do? He wants to write a book to sort of lay out his philosophy. And he set about to do it, getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, writing until 6 or 7 or 8, and then going to his job at the Datty, right? He wrote that Ireland must be recreated from within. It's got to be done by Irish people. The center of interest has to be Ireland. We have to do it for ourselves. And then we can look with confidence for the foundation of a fabric of Irish prosperity, framed in constructive thought and laid enduringly in human character. It's a wonderful document to read. Most of it makes perfect sense. He looks back at English or Anglo-Irish history, if you will, the interaction of these two countries. He looks back at it and he says famously, Anglo-Irish history is for the English to remember, but for the Irish to forget. Let's start and just look forward. Let the English look back. But in typical fashion, he insisted on inserting a chapter where basically he took on the Holy Roman Catholic Church and the bishops of Ireland. Not smart. He was advised to not do it. He was begged to not do it. But he says, it's the truth. I have to do it. So he did it. And he raised the profound ire of the Catholic Church. I mean, he basically wrote, why are you spending all this money and treasure building these cathedrals and big churches? We have work to do on the ground here right now. Forget about the hereafter. Let it take care of itself. Let's focus on right now. Did not win him any friends. So his chapter, I think there was a Monsignor O'Riordan or somebody in the Vatican who wrote a whole book about that chapter as a response to what was perceived as an attack on the Catholic Church of Ireland. Did a lot of harm to the movement. He shouldn't have ought to done it, but Plunkett had to do what he had to do. He was not the greatest politician. But it's a wonderful book to read if you have a chance. Just a few other things going around and circling around this cooperative movement too. There's the Irish homestead, which, you know, Joyce called it the pig's paper, right? But that's where Joyce was first published. A couple of stories from the dead published there, courtesy of George Russell. Russell was the editor for quite a few years. He wasn't the first, but he was the longest term. And it's actually if you have a chance to look at the original copy of the Homestead, it's a wonderful paper to look at. You got hog prices, you got technical advice, and then you've got poetry. You know, Patrick Cullum and others are writing in there. So you've got literature, you've got all of it: better business, better farming, and better living. That was the idea. And if you ever go to 84 Marion Square, it's a Georgian house right on the square. You know, you walk in the front door and you go up the second floor, and then there's like a big tall stairway up to the third floor. And that's where George Russell was when he was the editor of the Homestead. And somebody once said, you know, you'd walk up there, it was like walking up to God up that stairway. But interesting paper. And Russell himself was a great proponent of cooperation, a great assistant, a great friend to Plunkett for all this time. He did paint the walls of the Plunkett house with these fantastic scenes and everything. I believe they're in the National Museum now. And he advocated for this notion of a cooperative commonwealth, Russell. Kind of an amorphous idea. You can read his books and be none the wiser maybe at the end of them. But this was his idea, that you would have all these different cooperatives and that they would indeed work together. But so Russell was always circling around all of this. Plunkett had a private life too, small though it may be. He had his family obligations, but he also actually had a great love in his life. And it was Lady Fingal, a woman named Daisy Burke from Galway, who unfortunately was married to his cousin, Lord Fingal of Dungiven Castle, just not too far from Dunsany. He remained a bachelor all of his life. He was too much of a gentleman to do anything. He would not write in his diary. He wrote once that I cannot write anything, it would hurt somebody too much, so I cannot go there, and he never did. So we don't know any details. We know what she wrote in her book later, that, you know, about they were very close. She would come over to his place whenever he had to socialize or had a party or a dinner or something. She'd clean the place up and make sure things went well. They were close throughout their lives, but he never married. She once wrote that, you know, I know he loved me, but, you know, he loved cooperation so much, I'm sure he'd leave me in a train station like a lost bag or something if somebody called him to do something on cooperation. So that's where his heart was, and that's where his time and energy went. A few odd things. He had one of the first automobiles in Ireland, by the way. Maybe not the first, but might have been the second. Plunkett was very much into technology, and he would take it, he would try it. If it got him around faster, if he could go to more meetings, if he could do more things, he wanted those four wheels. What would he do with a cell phone, I wonder? What would he do with a smartphone today? I mean, he was a whirlwind as it was, and he was a pretty sickly guy, by the way. When you read the diaries, it's like reading the ailment of the day. He had many serious issues, but he was a dynamo of energy who just kept on going and going. In his later years, okay, we're going to accelerate here. Later years, he kept on going. He was involved in the States with Theodore Roosevelt and the Country Life Commission. He built his first home, 1906. I'll talk about that in a minute. Kiltara in South Dublin, in Fox Rock. It's right off of, I forget the name of the road now. Very nice area, right? So he finally had a home of his own. He went through the Easter Rising. He was driving his car to Merrion Square, took a few bullets through the windscreen, fired by British troops who didn't know who the hell he was, became the chairman of the Irish Convention. Another thankless task. I know you were talking about the composition of the negotiating team last night, Elizabeth, for the treaty negotiation. Well, you know, this was like a last-ditch effort, the Irish Convention, to maybe pull things together. Nothing had worked, but Plunkett thought he could do something. He thought he could maybe pull both sides together, keep the island whole, avoid partition through some type of dominion status or whatever. Now, the train had left the station. And Russell saw that. Sinn Féin was going to boycott. Russell backed away from it. He says, if it had a shadow of a chance, I'd do it. It doesn't. But Plunkett forged ahead, went through the convention, and maybe the most interesting document coming out of it is his recap of all the activities for the king, his privy memo that he shared widely, supposed to be private, but that failed. He led the Irish Dominion League after that, up until the treaty, 1921. There's a great publication called The Irish Statesman, which grew out of the Irish Homestead. Russell ran that, and it was a great place for intellectual thought. They were advocates for progress in Ireland. They were pushing the Shannon scheme and those sorts of things. So really interesting publication to look at. He was involved with that. 1920, 1921, they burned the creameries. The Black and Tans, the Aussies, whatever, they wanted to hit the Irish where it would hurt. And where it would hurt in all these small towns, mostly in Munster, an awful lot in Kerry and the Golden Vale is where they burned these creameries. I want to say they destroyed 40 of them. They put another 40 or so out of action. So, big numbers. In fact, in North Kerry, they came through Ballymackelligut, they came through Lixnaw, they came through Ratu, they came all around, and they just burned them systematically because they were seen to be sort of hotbeds of Sinn Féin activity, of IRA activity. Plunkett didn't see it that way. Nevertheless, they did have meetings in cooperative halls. Certainly in the past, the old IRB had met there. There was no question which way they leaned. So when they went after the creameries, they were not really going after some purely non-political maybe enterprise, but they went after it with a vengeance. So there was an awful lot of destruction. There were many claims for compensation afterwards. Plunkett was up to his neck in all of that. Yeah, so there you have it, 1920-21. He was appointed to the Free State Senate, along with Yates and some of the others in 1922, and he served. As he was serving, he made his customary Christmas trip to America, 1922-23. And while he was in America, they burned down his home in Kiltarra. And I'll talk about Kiltarra very quickly in a moment. After that, he left Ireland. 1923-24, he left Ireland, moved to Surrey in England, founded the Plunkett Foundation, which is still around, still doing good work in terms of fostering cooperation. Their latest activity, by the way, is to save the British pub. There's a British pub right outside here. They're trying to save the local, and they're doing it by cooperativizing it. And so they're running a rather successful campaign of cooperation in England to save the local pub. So the spirit of Plunkett's still moving somewhere. He went to England in 1923, died in 32. I'll finish off with just a very quick comment about Plunkett has left behind certainly the Irish cooperative movement and a lot of things of that sort. He's also left behind three buildings, actually, that are very representative, I think, of his life. Dungiven Castle, still there, 84 Merrion Square, and Kiltara in Foxrock. So that's the castle itself. We talked about Dungiven, great history there. I've been able to go there a couple of times. It was a remarkable feeling to go into Dungiven Castle, to see it as a lived-in place. We met the late Lady Dunsany, who died of COVID last March. But to walk through these halls with all the stuff hanging around on the walls, and I pointed to a helmet once. I said, "Oh, it's like a Cromwellian helmet." She said, "Oh yeah," takes it off the wall, gives it to me to kind of play around with. It's a home. They claim to be the oldest occupied home in Ireland. They may or may not be. It's close by Dungiven Castle, which was where Lady Fingal lived, which is now, it was bombed by the IRA in 1980 something. So it became a shell. They cleaned out the shell. So that's only the exterior walls. It's empty inside. And it's now a country and golf club. It's not the K Club, but it's a golf club. You can play there. By the way, when we think of Lord Dunsany, we normally think of this Lord Dunsany, who was Plunkett's nephew and who Plunkett was responsible for when he was growing up. They didn't always get along. So, but this is the playwright who once had 5 or 6 plays simultaneously on Broadway. Quite a remarkable achievement. That's Lord Dunsany. Got to go there for a Cooperative Congress in 2013. So it was still open to cooperators. People from around the world were able to get together and be in the drawing room with their painting of Plunkett behind and do our cooperative business. So it's very exciting to kind of feel the spirit of the place and of the man himself. And this is the current Lord Dunsany, Randall. He's a very nice guy. He's a filmmaker. He did a lot of kind of like Gothic kind of films and stuff, but he is now Lord Dunsany. His mother died last year, and he is rewilding the whole estate of Dunsany. So they're not going to cultivate everything. He says, let them come back. The foxes, the wolves, whatever, we're going to let it go. So he's a true believer. He must have his grandfather's just that kind of, you got to do it. So it's very impressive. And he's a really nice guy. And you have to admire what he's doing. He doesn't win a lot of friends necessarily doing this. Not everyone likes this. They want to see productive land being used. But he thinks he's doing a great service to sustainability in Ireland. I think he is too. Next building, 84 Merrion Square, right on Merrion Square. It's still there, the headquarters of the ICOS, the Irish Cooperative Organization Society, which is still in existence, still organizing cooperatives. Now, maybe it doesn't have the romantic allure that it had back in the day when it was most definitely a movement, but they're still there. They're still swinging. Maybe they spend more time paying attention to European prices or something, but they are there. And it's a great treat to be able to walk around the building there. I had a chance to see George Russell's desk, open the drawers, see what it was like. It's a great old space that they have there. And this was given to Plunkett by his supporters to further the work. So Plunkett gave it to the movement itself. And then finally was Kiltara, the home he built in 1908 or 1909. He'd never had a home, and he wanted to have a home where he could entertain Ireland, where every Irishman and woman of every persuasion could come, socialize, meet, talk, and maybe play a part in building up this nation. He had fantasies about the signing of a peace treaty on the portico of Kiltara, where all parties would come to the table. Ireland, probably Dominion status or whatever, like Canada, South Africa, New Zealand, whoever, was sort of his idea. That's what he envisioned. So it's kind of a weird looking place, maybe. Somewhere here, he had up at the top, he had like a rotating bed outside. He had a lot of like problems, health problems. So he liked the open air. So they built a bed for him up on the roof and had a screen that could turn around with the wind, and he could sleep out in the open air. So Plunkett was like that. Anyhow, it was a lovely place. The plans, that's he with Charlotte Shaw. Shaw went there a lot, by the way. In fact, everyone went there a lot. Well, Shaw thought Plunkett was a peculiar guy. He loved mankind and hated people, including Shaw. but he kept going back there, to be sure. What's really interesting is the Kiltarra guest book. After the fire, a few things were salvaged. One was Plunkett's diaries that were saved. The second was the Kiltarra guest book, which is now in Trinity College, and you can go have a look at it if you want. Going through the Kiltarra guest book, you look at the names in that book. The first entry was Emily Lawless, who was a cousin, great writer, but a cousin to Plunkett. But, and then you look at the final entries, Michael Collins, Hazel Lavery, the artist's wife, Kathleen Nee Houlihan herself, Parkin, Mary Cullum, George Yates. You know, I built this tower for my wife, George, but look at all the others who were there. The Balfours, Alice Stopford Green, Arthur Vickers, careless keeper of the crown jewels, right? George Russell, of course, Mahaffey, and Creven Even, right? Douglas Hyde himself, George Moore, of course, Mary Spring Rice, who was the daughter of Lord Monteagle, who ran guns for the IRA. Erskine and Mary Childers, they were very close to Plunkett. Plunkett was devastated when he was executed. But Sarah Purser, Susan Mitchell, Dermot O'Brien, the painter, the Shaws, Yates, the O'Connor Don, Diggs Latouche, he was he owned Guinness or the general manager of Guinness, Connor Cruz O'Brien, Desmond Fitzgerald. Capablanca, by the way, another aside, Plunkett was a great chess player, and Capablanca was the #1 rated chess player in the world. So they were playing chess there in Kiltarra. It was a remarkable place, and it was a terrible thing when it was burned down. If you go there now, what you will find is Plunkett, I mean, even though he was devastated, even though he was in self-imposed exile, he still developed the site. And they turned Kiltarra into like 6 maisonettes or something. And I did see an ad and there are 2 gatekeeper lodges out front on the Westminster Road. That's what it is, on Westminster Road, which is a very nice area. The lodges, one of them is going for 1.4 million euro. I think I saw in the Times property supplement there a little while ago. Anyhow, so there was arson at Kiltarra. They burned it down, and they bombed it one night. Came back the next night after the police had left, and they set it ablaze. So the whole thing was lost. And he had a lot of his papers. He was going to write an autobiography. He was going to write about the Dunsany family, the Plunkett family. All those papers went up in smoke. They salvaged the diaries, but not much else. So what has Plunkett left us? Well, he's left us very tangible things, like the ICOS, like the Department of Agriculture, like the Plunkett Foundation, still out there, still doing good work. And still furthering that noble aim of cooperation, which is not socialism, which, if anything, it tries to create capitalists, not condemn capitalists. He's left behind this notion of self-reliance, which is not ourselves alone, but self-reliance where we are competitive in the world arena, where we trade on that which we do best, which we get the best out of ourselves. He's left behind a sense of this practical idealism, this notion of that, you got to have grand ideas, right? You have to have some level of idealism. You have to strive that way, but you got to have your feet on the ground. You have to be willing to compromise. You have to be able to move incrementally. And he left behind a sense that there is one Ireland. He never wanted to see the partition of the Ireland. He thought that Irishmen of both traditions, they would fit together. They'd find the best in themselves, and they'd have a stronger country for it. And he's left behind that feeling. He left behind destructive politics. And I think he offers a lesson for us even today. So I think he's not been forgotten. Cooperators know who he is and so on. But I think his legacy has been sort of undersold. And I think we can learn a lot from Horace Plunkett. So I will stop finally. Thank you very much for listening. And yeah, thank you.
might just share the mic so the people.
Okay,
online-
sure.
I'll just explain to them. So everyone, thank you very much. We have a hybrid again today. So if anyone on Facebook has a question or comment, you can type it in the chat and I'll pass it on. Again, if we have questions from our live audience here, you won't maybe be able to hear that because of the microphone won't stretch, but I'll repeat it. And so nobody panic online. Okay. Anyone in the audience with a question or a comment? Peter.
So,
And you have to.
great presentation. Some person I hadn't really known a lot about, but a few things came to mind. One was self-reliance, which in a business sense is clear.
Yeah.
But in a sense, the timing, when his cooperation movement takes off, the term self-reliance cannot, like, he says it's not political, but surely he realized eventually that everything is political, that his actions that were trying to be apolitical, in the end just fed into the larger fire.
I mean, he said he was non-political, but he wasn't. I mean, he began the movement that way, but he was a liberal unionist. He went into Parliament and he got pitched out because he just didn't fit into the right kind of box, I suppose. He moved ever so slowly towards becoming a home ruler. He was a home ruler long before he said he was, right? But he kept moving certainly in that direction. And I mean, he knew it was political. He didn't play the game all that well. He wasn't that, maybe he didn't have that sort of cutthroat sort of approach. But I think he knew that it was, I mean, everything was political of necessity. And there's a lot of stories about, I mean, the movement had a lot of problems. After he was pitched out of the Department of Agriculture, they lost their subvention. You know, if you know about cooperatives, it's always tough to get cooperative organizations to pay their dues. So they went through some very hard times, and politics was all in that. But he consistently found himself in between both traditions, if you will. The unionists, he was not a reliable member. He could not be trusted to look after their interests as they saw it. And the nationalists, he was never one of them, right? They were never entirely sure, you know, what's in it for him. So it seems to me he occupied a very sort of interesting and very difficult. The middle in Ireland is a difficult place to be, certainly at that time. Other times too. Yeah. So
It was kind of coming from a place of privilege too, though, I suppose, in one way that he didn't have to pander or cater, you know, it's a kind of an entitlement maybe that he might have thought it through in one way.
Yeah, he was very much a creature of his class,
Yeah.
right? The way he thought, the way he perceived things.
Can you talk a little bit about how transformative the creameries themselves were for people, you know, like particularly growing up in Kerry, and I'm sure Peter there in County Limerick, you know, I mean, well into the 20th century, kind of the late 20th century, it was a really transformative aspect of the rural landscape, you know, in Ireland.
Yeah, you know, I think it went through different phases, of course. You know, it went through the beginning phase when there was all this idealism, all this energy, there was all this growth year after year as the movement grew. When the first pioneers passed from the scene, I think that sense of romance sort of went away. And it became more of a business type thing, more of a bean counting sort of operation, more a matter of consolidation and so on. And cooperatives didn't always have an easy time in the 20th century, even in Kerry, right? You had something called the Dairy Disposal Board, which picked up a lot of the old, not just the proprietary creameries, but also cooperatives that failed, a lot of failed cooperatives, and ran them until very recent times. So it hasn't been all, you know, all smooth sailing, to be sure, but they're economically viable. They're players. I mean, they had groups coming from around the world coming to study the Irish cooperative movement to see how it was done. So they became an exemplar to others on what could be done. And, you know, we can look at the numbers of societies, we can look at the amount of turnover, and they were very impressive for the longest time. Now, the latest phase, and I can talk about this whenever I talk about Kerry, is of the very successful cooperatives now becoming public corporations. in the process enriching more than a few Kerry farmers, by the way. So to be sure. So, but I do think that there's a lot of interest in cooperation around the world, and not just for farming, right? Worker cooperatives are quite active in some parts of the world: Spain, Italy, northern Italy, certain areas. And cooperation, we talk about social enterprises now, and we talk about a third way. Well, cooperatives are sort of the original social enterprise, because they have that notion that, yeah, better business and better technology, but better living, and it fits together. So, I find it to be tremendously appealing, because the idea is that cooperation is not anti-capitalistic. It creates capitalists. It creates ownership, and I think that that's what they played on here.
So Facebook people, don't forget to type in your comments if you have any questions. Does anybody else have a question or comment? I think it's amazing his work in America. I'd kind of forgotten about that, so to think that he hung out with, Roosevelt, I can't really imagine the Lord of the Manor, with the bully president.
Yeah, they apparently got along quite well. They sort of spoke the same language, but they had the same experiences out. Plunkett was in Wyoming. I think Roosevelt was up in Montana or somewhere, both for similar reasons. But yeah, and others like Gifford Pinchot here in the States, one of the first environmentalists, right? Plunkett was very close to him. He was also, I haven't even gone into a lot of stuff. Some say Plunkett was a spy, because he worked very hard to get the States into World War I. He was going back and forth to Washington, to New York, always talking, trying to pull Wilson into the war. And was that spying? Well, he was doing what he thought was right for the empire, I guess. So he was an Anglo-American Irishman. He was involved in so many different things, with such an energy level for a guy who was really so sick. In many ways, it's interesting.
Well, on the day that the Solemn League and Covenant was signed in Belfast, it's interesting to talk about somebody like him who tried to unite, different groups. I think this mic is picking us up better than I thought. So Facebook, you're strangely silent, which means I'm going to have to leave you if you have no questions. We do have a talk on the 5th of October. My God, he's an author from Boston and a former TFA agent, Warren Miller. He's going to discuss his book, Burn, Boston, Burn, which will detail a series of arson attacks in Boston. We don't have the rest of the dialogue or the diary sort of finalized yet for October, but I know we have a Professor Dara, I forget her last name, from Trinity College. She's going to be talking about Irish Gothic and horror and all that on the 28th of October. The Centenary series will continue, and we have a few other treats in store. So stay tuned. And this talk will be available on our Facebook and website tomorrow. Thanks very much, everyone. This was fantastic. Thank you, Professor Kennelly. We'll have you back, Kennelly. and enjoy, everyone. Have a great night at home. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.